The current sentiment in the market remains super pessimistic. Today we're breaking it down and explain why things feel very bearish, even as the bigger trend still looks very strong, and what I think is the most likely reason behind the recent Bitcoin sell-off. We'll also get into probably the most bullish headline of this week, and I'll share why, despite all the noise, I remain bullish. I am RK, your host of the Pioneers of Bitcoin podcast, and let's get into it. Okay, so before we start the podcast, I think there's a few things I want to talk about, which reminds me of a few years ago when we had the backlash and the fight about this topic of Bitcoin with Elon Musk online. So, little backstory before I show you this video. Elon Musk basically endorsed Bitcoin back in 2021, and he bought Bitcoin for his companies, and he actually never sold those Bitcoin, and he's definitely still into it, but he actually said a few things back then which basically was somehow against the philosophy of Bitcoin with regards to its energy consumption. And back then, you know, everybody was talking about Bitcoin boiling the oceans, and I think he had also a lot of pressure to remain sustainable and actually remain within the narrative of his industry, which is using renewable energy and so on and so forth. Anyways, he said in 2021 that he will stop using Bitcoin as a payment for Tesla until Bitcoin becomes neutral. I mean, the energy consumption of the Bitcoin network becomes neutral. So it's actually more environmental friendly. And ever since that time, I think there was also a lot of back and forth in the community with him, and he somehow got turned off and stopped talking about Bitcoin altogether. And just last week, he gave an interview and he finally spoke about this topic again. And let's take a listen to what he had to say about this. Let me just...
Some fundamental currencies, if you will, that are physics-based. So energy is the true currency. This is why I said Bitcoin is based on energy. You can't legislate energy. You can't just, pass a law and suddenly have a lot of energy. It's very difficult to generate energy, or especially to harness energy in a useful way to do useful work. So I think that probably we won't have money, and probably we'll just have energy, power generation as the de facto currency. Some fundamental...
Okay. So as you can see, Bitcoin humbles everybody, including the richest man in the world. It's just a question of time until everybody comes to the same conclusions that Bitcoin is a form of asset that actually requires work and energy, and that is its biggest feature. You want that to be the case because you don't want anybody to be able to create more of it. And the only way to do that is to have some form of proof that you did work for the Bitcoin. And the algorithm that is being used in Bitcoin is proof of work, which means that you need to have energy consumption in order to get paid and have a chance to find a block in the Bitcoin blockchain and get rewarded with fees and block subsidy. So Elon comes to the same conclusion. Everybody in Bitcoin who understands Bitcoin have come to the same conclusion, and everybody eventually will. So I'll talk about the same when it comes to the next headline, which is quite big. I mean, it's actually very big. Remember Vanguard. So a little backstory about this. This is another bend the knee to Bitcoin phenomenon that we have this week. So Vanguard is the second largest asset manager in the world. First is BlackRock, second is Vanguard. And when BlackRock announced that they will launch a Bitcoin ETF, Vanguard completely dismissed it and said that we will not endorse this. And let's actually look at the quote. The CEO said in January of 2024. Oh, actually, this is a very old headline. Okay, this is a very old headline, but actually it says the same thing. So you will never see a Bitcoin fund from us. This was from 2018. Very interesting. And there is a video where the CEO actually said very similar, I mean, almost the same statement after their biggest competitor, BlackRock, launched a Bitcoin ETF, because they were asked, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to launch a Bitcoin ETF as well? Are you going to let your clients buy Bitcoin? What is the story here? And this is what he had to say after we had the news that BlackRock is going to launch the Bitcoin ETF. This is from March 2024. So around 4 years after this, we hear BlackRock launching ETF and the CEO of Vanguard saying this.
Spot Bitcoin ETFs. Question came in, hey, we know you're not offering one. Have you changed your mind? What would it take for you to change your mind? We don't plan to, and we don't, we're not going to change our minds around this. Unless the asset class changes.
Yep.
Before, why? First of all, we don't believe it belongs. Like a Bitcoin ETF belongs in a long-term portfolio. Someone's saving for their retirement. It's a speculative asset.
That's exactly it.
And the funds that we offer invest in asset classes that actually have underlying cash flow. So, like we mentioned stocks, you're buying the forward earnings of a company.
That's right.
And that bond, right,
has coupon and principal payments.
Yeah, you're going to pay me back and you're going to pay me something for lending you the money.
Exactly.
Right, so they both can be valued. And that's, for us, we understand why they would rise up in a portfolio and the role they will play, and we can model them. Something like Bitcoin is just too volatile, and it's not a store of value. It hasn't been. And it's very volatile. When stocks got hit.
Okay, that's another boomer not understanding Bitcoin, and I could dismantle every single line of this video, but I'm not going to. We don't have time for that. So this was in March 2024, and he completely dismissed that his biggest competitor is actually launching a Bitcoin ETF. And guess what? That very ETF became the fastest growing ETF in history. The fastest growing ETF in history was or is IBIT, which is BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. And interestingly, just 2 months later, this guy gets fired and he is replaced with this new CEO. And I don't know, maybe this was planned ahead, but it's interesting how this happened right after the company, or the asset managing company Vanguard, completely dismissed this topic of Bitcoin after their biggest competitor launched this ETF. And ever since then, we had the new CEO, Salim Ramji, taking his seat. And just this week, guess what we now have as a headline? Vanguard will now allow crypto ETFs on its platform. December 1st, 2025. Hallelujah. So what's the story? Bitcoin humbles everybody, including the richest man in the world and the second largest asset manager in the world with $9.3 trillion with this is a crazy amount. This is how much they manage. This is their asset under management. And I think BlackRock is at 11 trillion and they're at like 9.3 trillion. It's crazy how much money this is. So that's the headline. Vanguard is now allowing their clients to buy the IBIT. They didn't launch their own ETF. Now they bent the knee to the ETF of their biggest competitor. Very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very bullish. Very bullish. But still, people are bearish on Bitcoin for whatever reason. But let's move on. So let's actually analyze what's happening in Bitcoin and why the Bitcoin price dumped again from 91,000 down to, I think, what's the price? I actually forgot to say the Bitcoin price. I keep forgetting to do that at the beginning of the podcast. I have to remember that. Still getting into the episodes, guys, so be patient with me. So Bitcoin's price right now is at 87,300 and we were at 91,500 just a few days ago, and we had a huge wick down on December 1st, like almost exactly on December 1st, and I'm going to look into this and analyze what the reason of this could be. Okay, so let's take a look at this headline. So, but before we look at the headline, which is very interesting, you might have heard of the term the carry trade. Okay, so what is a carry trade? A carry trade is basically if there is a low interest rate currency and a high interest rate currency, and investors borrow money from the low interest rate currency and invest it in a high interest rate currency. So there is a spread where you can actually make money with, but the risk obviously is the exchange rate of the two currencies. So the yen, the Japanese yen, which is one of the most important currencies in the world, they're part of the DXY, which is the index of the most important currencies against the dollar. The dollar is the first, but I think the Japanese yen, the Canadian dollar, the euro, the British pound, they're in the basket of the DXY, which is an index of the most important currencies in the world. So what is the carry trade? The carry trade, basically, let's ask actually ChatGPT here. You borrow yen because interest rates in Japan have been low, very low, almost at zero, and you swap those into dollars because in the US we have higher interest rates. So that is it. So very, very simple. This is the carry trade, essentially. Now, what's the risk here? The risk is if the yen suddenly goes up and you have borrowed the yen and you've invested it into the other currency, which is falling, you have to get rid of your dollars as soon as possible to pay back the loan in yen. So this creates a sell pressure to the high yield currency, in this case the dollar, and a buy pressure on the low interest currency, which is the yen in this case. So if the Japanese yen is expected to have higher yield, everybody who borrowed in that currency want to buy it back as soon as possible before the interest rates go up to pay back the loan that they are owing, that they have to pay back. Okay, so that's the carry trade, and hundreds of thousands of people do this because as long as the yen stays somehow stable against the dollar, that is an amazing trade, right? But here's a headline that we saw on December 2nd. Actually, it was on December 1st, so almost at midnight here, December 1st, yes. So it says here, this is Reuters, December 1st, the dollar slipped against the Japanese yen on Monday following Bank of Japan's governor strongest indication to date that a December interest rate increase could be under consideration, providing support to the embattled Japanese yen. Very, very, very interesting. Now let's take a look at the dollar yen chart. So here's the dollar yen chart. There it is. Okay, so as you can see, the dollar is, no, this is a very short-term chart. Let me go to the weekly. Okay, so as you can see, we reached a high in November of this year, just last month, on the 17th of November. We reached a high at 157 yen per dollar. This is the highest price, or was the highest price, since January of this year. So this is a 1 year high, almost a 1 year high. And after the news came, you had this wick here. You see this wick down to, what was that? To 154. Okay, that is actually, guys, this market, the Forex market, is the biggest market in the world. And a wick like this is actually a really big deal. You know, if you're into Bitcoin, you're like, that's nothing. But for the FX market, what is this? 1% is a huge deal. Okay, that's a huge wick that you see here. That is a big deal. Okay, this wick here, and it came immediately after the news of the Japanese wanting to raise rates. And if they want to raise rates, what do people do? They sell their dollars, because they have to sell their dollars and buy back the yen to pay back the amount that they have to that they owe. And that creates a sell pressure on the dollar versus the yen, and it forces prices to go down. Okay? Now, what is, I'm going to ask you this question. Ask yourself, what is the only free market that is open 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and is the most liquid asset to sell to take care of your liabilities? It's Bitcoin. You see, we had on December 1st this wick here. You see, we went from 90,000 or almost 91,000 down to 83,000 in just a few hours overnight. And interestingly, immediately after this news came out, you see, the correlation is very interesting. Obviously, these correlations are very short term. They don't hold for the long term. But it's interesting because what does that tell you? It tells you that investors, when they're in panic and they owe a lot of money, they're going to try to sell everything they have in order to meet the liabilities that they owe. And they want to do that before the liabilities become more expensive. So that explains the reason why we had a Bitcoin sell-off. And as you can see, the price has been moving almost in locksteps with Bitcoin and the yen in the past few days. So this is the reason. This could be one of the, I think most likely this is the reason we had the sell-off on December 1st for sure. Now it's back a little bit. And interestingly, the dollar is also back up a little bit. And one more thing that is hinting at the money printer coming back very, very soon, and it's already coming back, is that the Fed just massively injected liquidity, over 13 billion, into the repo market just last night. Interestingly, immediately after the rate hike news came about the yen, This is one of the largest liquidity injections since 2020. Get that. 2020 was COVID, guys. This is a huge, I mean, it has to be a huge emergency, and we don't know what's happening among the banks. If the trust is gone among banks, that's when the Fed steps in and provides the liquidity for banks to lend each other money and like each other. So that's what's happening here. We had the highest injection of emergency liquidity since 2020, which means that markets are in panic, and we still haven't had a big sell-off in stocks. I mean, they have corrected a little bit, but we had a big sell-off in Bitcoin. And you can argue Bitcoin is the only free market without any manipulators, and that's the reason why, because there is nobody injecting direct liquidity into Bitcoin. There is no central bank saving Bitcoin. Bitcoin is on a completely transparent and open market, on an open network that everybody can trade 24/7 a day, and 24/7, 365. And obviously people are going to use that asset if they need to meet their liabilities. And markets are at stress, that's for sure. And the money printer is coming at its rescue as usual. So what does that mean for Bitcoin? This is a very interesting tweet from Benjamin Cohen. He says, in July 2024, okay, just last year, the Fed cut rates while the BOJ raised rates, leading to an unwind of the carry trade. Bitcoin capitulated into it and found a low just 1 week after. Good chance this happens again on December 10th. Fed cuts, BOJ raises rates. So maybe Bitcoin finds a low in mid-December. And as you can see here, we had the low here last year in July, and we could see the low again because the Fed decision is on December 10th, just like we did last year. Obviously, guys, nobody knows the near future. Nobody does. But this is an indication that this could be a short-term local bottom for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin always leads. It always leads the liquidity crunch. If there is not enough liquidity in the market, the most free and liquid and open asset is the first thing that investors will use to meet their obligations, and that's Bitcoin. I always say, the biggest feature of Bitcoin is that it's freedom money. But because it's freedom money, its biggest feature being as liquid as it is and available as it is also sometimes its biggest enemy, because people can sell it. They cannot sell their house overnight, but they can sell their Bitcoin overnight. And because of that, you have this type of volatility in the mid of the night. In the UAE, it was the middle of the night when this news came, and you have a wick like this down, and it also happens to the other side, right? So it can go up like this, it can go down like this, but it is because of its liquidity and availability, and because it's so easy to sell. That's the reason why we have this correlation. Guys, make sure, I saw a few comments in our last video. Make sure you comment on the videos. I try to respond to every single comment. We do actually respond on our YouTube channel. We also do respond during the next episode. If we see really good questions, we try to answer those. Make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. So if you're listening to this on Spotify, that's great. But we also run this podcast on YouTube. So if you want to see the charts I always show, just come online on YouTube and watch the video. There's a lot to learn when I show charts, obviously, and you can understand things much better. And give us a thumbs up, share this video with your loved ones, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.
you.